Welcome to Calf Academy, your source for calf care education.
This module is entitled Overview of Calf Nutrition. The goal of the calf is to maintain health, for the calf to grow and positively influence its future productivity. The factors that can affect these goals are birth events, the presence or absence or quality of colostrum, and then the nutritional aspects, which we're going to look at in this module, as well as the environment, which we've looked at in a previous module. By way of an outline, we're going to look at the basics of calf nutrition. We're going to look at the goals of calf nutrition, and then calf feeding programs in general to meet those goals. And then we're going to look at calf feeding in extreme environments. And then we're going to look at weaning, where we transition a calf from milk to starters. The basics of calf nutrition. Looking at the basic components of a calf nutrition program, the components include protein. Protein builds lean tissue in the calf and it contributes to structural growth. Protein also supports immune function. Available energy provides a source of growth and activity, as well as supports immune function, and vitamins and minerals are necessary for bone development and immune system support as well. The goals of calf nutrition are: we want to keep the calf healthy, growing, and developing a functional rumen. The type of calves being fed directly affects the goals of the feeding system. Calves raised on farm, which are replacement heifers on a dairy farm, the colostrum status is largely in the control of the producer or the calf raiser. The pathogen load is also something the producer or raiser can affect. A nutritional or feeding strategy can be applied to fit the producer's goals. We know that more growth during the first 60 days will result in higher lactation yields in the first and second lactations. On a calf ranch where they're raising calves on a custom basis for dairies, the colostrum status is something that can be affected. The pathogen load for arrival is important. And then there needs to be a contract between the calf raiser and the dairy for the health of the calf at arrival, affected by the colostrum status and pathogen load at birth. Whether or not the contract includes a growth goal or a cost per head per day goal largely affects which nutritional strategy will be used. Single source bull calves being raised, the colostrum status can be determined, the pathogen load can be affected, and you want to maximize with your nutritional strategy early efficient growth. When raising multiple source bull calves, the colostrum status may be unknown or known to be bad. Therefore, the pathogen load management needs to be emphasized. And the nutritional program can be supported with additives to enhance immunity as well as gut development. An overview of calf nutrition: calves are born monogastric, that is, they're pre-ruminant. They have the high capacity to digest milk for the first few weeks of life. Milk or milk replacer is the major source of nutrition until grain intake becomes appreciable, and it is important during this time that the conditions be right for optimal rumen development for successful weaning. The goal in the early development is rumen development, and you want to develop a functional rumen. The newborn calf stomach is 60% abomasum and 25% rumen. They digest milk proteins, and starter stimulates rumen development. The adult cow stomach is 80% rumen. It is designed for forage digestion and fermentation. We're feeding bacteria instead of feeding the cow, and the bacteria produce microbial protein and volatile fatty acids that then contribute to the cow's nutrition. The calf nutrition issue is: are we seeking rumen development or faster growth, or both? Milk in the calf stomach. Milk is readily digested in the intestinal tracts. It's an excellent source of protein and energy. However, milk is fermented into rumen, and that's not a good thing. The esophageal groove allows milk to bypass the rumen and go directly to the abomasum, so that it does not ferment in the rumen. Various factors, all of which that are not known, stimulate the closure of the esophageal groove, allowing the milk to bypass the rumen. Then, when the calf drinks fresh water, that enters the rumen and affects the fermentation of the starter there. Starter in the calf stomach. Starter grain is fermented in the rumen to create volatile fatty acids. Volatile fatty acid production is what causes the rumen papillae or functional surface to develop. Volatile fatty acids are a major source of energy to the animal once it becomes a ruminant. Good fermentation needs starter grains and fresh water during its early stages of rumen development. Pictured here in this slide is the healthy rumen of a 4-week-old calf that has been fed milk and calf feed and free choice water. Long stem hay in the calf stomach. Hay provides protein and fiber. It does not develop rumen papillae. During the early stages of rumen development, you want good digestible starter grain and water in the rumen, not long stem hay. Hay can fill up the valuable space in the young calf's rumen and reduce starter feed intake. Pictured here is the digestive system of a 4-week-old calf fed milk and hay and a 12-week-old calf fed milk and hay. When further considering long stem hay in the calf, hay is not needed or beneficial before 8 weeks of age. Then begin limited hay introduction. 1 week after grouping or 1 week after weaning, you can offer hay at about a half a pound per head per day maximum. It's important to note the hay nutrients take 3 weeks to be available based on immature rumen fermentation dynamics. Therefore, filling the rumen with hay at this stage is not beneficial to the calf. An important factor during rumen development and certainly at weaning is free choice water intake. Calves deprived of water will eat less starter and will grow much slower than calves that are offered free choice water. During a 4-week evaluation, calves that had free choice water available drank an average of 91.3 pounds of water and ate 25.9 pounds of starter. Calves with no water access only ate 17.9 pounds of starter during that 4-week period. Calves deprived of water gained 38% less than calves offered free choice water. Let's look at some calf feeding programs in a general sense. The basic calf feeding program include the liquid diet can be either quality milk replacer or whole milk. The calf starter, the formula considerations, and the palatability are paramount importance. And then free choice water has been stated a couple times already. Calf milk replacers were developed over 50 years ago, mainly for economic reasons. During the last several years, milk replacers are used with the focus on biosecurity. Now, milk replacer programs are evolving into advanced feeding strategies based on the nutritional requirements of the calf health advantages, and future productivity observations of accelerated or advanced milk replacer feeding strategies. Typical calf feeding recommendations or conventional calf feeding recommendations. Milk replacers are 20 to 22% protein, 15 to 20% fat. Feeding rates are 1.25 to 1.5 pounds per head per day, or 10 ounce or 12 ounce feeding rates. For a 100-pound calf, 10 to 12 ounces and 2 quarts of water fed twice a day. Free choice calf starter and free choice water. When evaluating calf feeding strategies and their potential effect on available nutrients for performance, a tool that's used is provided by the National Research Council for Dairy Cattle. The National Research Council Dairy Cattle tool provides calf nutrient requirements, protein, energy, vitamins, and minerals, and predicts energy and protein available for growth based on the ration nutrients, body weight, and the ambient temperature, which are entered into the tool. So, the NRC predicted available nutrients for average daily gain for a 100-pound calf fed a 2020 milk replacer at their dry matter intake rate of 1 pound per head per day up to 1.75 pounds per day. The NRC predicted average daily gain at 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 pound of intake is 0. At 1.25 pounds of intake is 0.24 pounds per head per day. At 1.5 pounds of intake is 0.66 pounds per head per day. And at 1.75 pounds of intake is 1.03 pounds per head per day. Metabolizable energy at megacals per day is 2.14 all the way up to 3.75 for the highest feeding rate. If you look at calf growth based on energy from a 2020 milk replacer, if you feed 1.25 pounds of milk replacer per head per day, dry matter intake per head per day, your megacals per day of metabolizable energy is 2.68. If you increase the feeding rate to 1.5 pounds per head per day, or the 12-ounce feeding rate, your megacals of energy, or your metabolizable energy available for gain, is 3.21 pounds per head per day. Therefore, 1.25 pounds of intake of a 2020 supports 0.78 pounds of average daily gain, where 1.5 pounds of dry matter intake supports 1.13 pounds per head per day average daily gain. That means a 1/4 pound per head per day of dry matter intake of milk replacer will increase your average daily gain by 0.35 pounds. What influences calf growth? 1 is protein level, 2 is the energy level, 3 is the environment, their health, and their genetics. If you look at the NRC, protein available for gain and energy available for gain for a 100-pound calf at 70 degrees Fahrenheit fed a 20/20 milk replacer at different feeding rates. If you feed at the 1 pound per head per day feeding rate, the protein available for gain is 0.52 pounds per day. The energy available for gain is 0.39. If you look at what the animal will actually gain, it'll gain at the limiting factor average daily gain. In this case, it's the energy gain, which is 0.39 pounds per head per day. Increase the feeding rate to 1.25. The protein available for gain is 0.72, and the energy available for gain is 0.79. Therefore, the protein becomes the limiting factor, and the calf gains 0.72 pounds per head per day. All the way up to 2 pounds per head per day of a 20/20, you can see that protein is now the limiting factor, and the calf gains 1.30 pounds per head per day. In a conventional feeding program, the pros and cons are this. The pros are biosecurity. The cost of milk replacer is minimized. It's relatively easy to manage. There are fewer digestive problems. And you have early starter consumption because of the negative energy balance that you're in. The cons are we're not reaching the genetic potential for growth rates. When looking at accelerated growth programs, we look at milk replacer formulas that are 26 to 30% protein, 15 to 20% fat, with feeding levels of 2 to 3% of the body weight fed per calf per day. Feeding levels can vary with the age of the calf, but overall, the powder intake is 2 to 3 pounds of dry matter per calf per day. The goal is to maximize milk and starter intake in an accelerated program. When using an accelerated growth program, we need to pay particular attention to solution density and provide a phased feeding. A possible scenario would be week 1 on the milk replacer. After colostrum, they get 1.25 to 1.6 pounds of milk replacer powder per head per day. Week 2 to 6, they ramp up to 2 to 3 pounds of milk replacer powder per head per day. And then week 6 or 7, 1 week prior to weaning, they cut the feeding of milk replacer in half over that 1 week period. The solution density can range from 12.5 to 16% solids. 1.25 pounds of powder in a gallon of water equals 13% solids. 1.5 pounds of powder in a gallon of water equals 15.2% solids. Other accelerated growth feeding considerations are free choice water must be available at all times. Free choice starter should be available by day 4. Milk should be reduced by 50% or cut in half 1 week before weaning. If starter intake and water intake is optimized during the later feeding stages, this supports rumen development, functional rumen development. Calves are weaned based on their starter intake in an accelerated growth program and should be eating 4 to 5 pounds of starter for 3 consecutive days before they're weaned. In an accelerated growth feeding program, we must be able to phase feed the calves. Important to note that accelerated feeding is not for everybody. Some systems will not allow it. There's research that supports accelerated feeding. A 30/20 protein to fat milk replacer fed at 1%, 3%, and 4% of body weight at 15% and 18% solids respectively, was fed to 60 Holstein bull calves, birthed to 230 pounds, from 0 to 99 days of age. The conclusion was the diet composition influences body composition, there was greater lean tissue growth, and fat deposition decreased. Some nutritional considerations for accelerated feeding programs. Higher feeding rates need higher protein milk replacers so that protein is not the limiting factor in the growth rate of the calves. Special formulations with higher protein lead to lean tissue growth, not fatty calves. Higher intake means formula medication levels are different. If a milk replacer formula is going to be fed at a high rate in an accelerated feeding program, inclusion rates of medications need to be adjusted accordingly. Therefore, looking at the NRC predicted protein available for gain and energy available for gain for a 100-pound calf at 70 degrees with a 26/20 milk replacer feeding, we look at pounds of powder fed per calf per day of 1 pound fed. The protein available for gain is 0.76 and the energy available for gain is 0.37, very similar to the 20/20 fed at that level. However, when we go to the higher feeding rates of 1.75 to 2 pounds of powder per head per day, both the protein available for gain and the energy available for gain support a 1.52 and a 1.78 respectively average daily gain. At the higher feeding rates, the higher protein milk replacers are more advantageous. When comparing conventional milk replacer feeding programs and accelerated feeding programs, we look at a 2020 milk replacer where the protein available for gain and the energy available for gain are balanced. For a 2020 milk replacer, they are balanced at 1.25 pound per head per day intake, or a 10-ounce feeding rate. A 2620 milk replacer, the protein available for gain and the energy available for gain are balanced at 1.75 pounds of powder per head per day, are not too far out of balance at 2 pounds per head per day of dry matter intake, showing that the higher protein products are needed if we're going to use the higher accelerated feeding rates. The pros and cons of accelerated feeding. The pros are the calves grow faster and taller. The higher protein diets lead to lean tissue growth. The cons are there's higher out-of-pocket costs with the higher feeding rate program. The milk replacers are more expensive, and we're feeding them at a higher rate. Management needs to be ready to feed a phased feeding program if accelerated feeding programs are going to be used. More bedding will be needed because more urine and feces will be produced. And delay weaning potential. They take longer to wean in an accelerated feeding program, and this is often associated with higher labor costs. Let's look for a minute at calf feeding in extreme environments. Let's look at some environmental factors that influence calf growth. Wind can alter the temperature to be outside of the thermoneutral zone. 50 degrees may be thermoneutral during still air. It is below the thermoneutral zone if it's windy in 50 degrees. Sun, daytime versus nighttime temperatures can be much different based on solar energy. Large temperature swings between the day and the night are hard on calves. And then moisture. Calves should be kept dry to keep insulated from the environmental effects. This graph indicates the temperatures where the maintenance needs of the calves are at their lowest level. At the lower critical temperature, or the thermoneutral zone, the maintenance needs of the animals are at their lowest level. As temperature increases or decreases beyond the thermoneutral zone, the maintenance energy need increases. The thermoneutral zone for a newborn calf is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. For a 1-month-old calf, that reduces to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And for a dry dairy cow who is functionally ruminating, it's 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Above that or below that, there's an increased energy need for maintenance. The calf's energy requirements based on temperature effects are pretty dramatic. If you look at a calf eating a 2020 milk replacer at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it can meet its maintenance energy requirement at 0.82 pounds of 2020 milk replacer intake per head per day, or 1.5 pounds of dry matter intake per head per day. The calf can support an average daily gain of 1.32 pounds per head per day. If the temperature drops to 10 degrees, there's an 80% increase in the metabolizable energy necessary just for maintenance. Therefore, the calf would have to eat 1.52 pounds of 2020 per head per day just to meet its maintenance energy requirement, and to gain 1.32 pounds per head per day, which it did with 1.5 pounds of intake at 60 degrees. At 10 degrees, it would have to eat 2.35 pounds of 2020 powder per head per day to gain 1.32 pounds of body weight. Management considerations during extreme temperatures. You want to feed a program where the maintenance energy requirement of the calves is exceeded and you maintain the desired growth rates. We need to focus on young calves as they are most susceptible with a higher thermoneutral zone. Calves predominantly less than 3 weeks of age. Nutritional strategies we can use to achieve these objectives. One is increase the amount of powder. If we go from 10 ounces to 12 ounces per 2 quarts of water, that'll increase our dry matter intake from 1.25 to 1.5 pounds of dry matter per head per day. We can increase the liquid feeding rate and effectively increase the dry matter intake as well. Increase from 2 quarts to 2.5 to 3 quarts per head per feeding. Another way is to add a third feeding. Feed 2 quarts per head per feeding 3 times per day instead of twice per day. And lastly, utilize a fat supplement of 2 to 4 ounces per calf per day to increase the energy value of the milk replacer that we're feeding. Let's look briefly at weaning and the transition to starter feeds. Considerations when looking at the calf starter program is calves need access to free choice starter. It should be at least 18% protein. It should be a good quality and palatable with limited fines. And then free choice water, as we saw earlier, goes directly to the rumen and increases starter intake and supports rumen development. Let's look at the importance of starter intake when temperatures become cold and the calf's maintenance energy requirement increases. A 100-pound calf at 10 degrees Fahrenheit eating a 2020 milk replacer at 1 pound of dry matter intake all the way up to 1.5 pounds of dry matter intake of 2020 milk replacer is in a weight loss or a negative energy balance. The calf has to consume 1.75 pounds of 2020 powder per head per day to get in a positive energy balance and start gaining weight. Take that same calf and consider that it would eat a 1/2 pound of starter per head per day. That calf will achieve a positive energy balance at 1.25 pounds of milk replacer powder intake. By the time it's eating 2 pounds of milk replacer powder per head per day, plus the 1/2 pound of starter, will be gaining 1.28 pounds and be in a positive energy balance. One criteria for weaning calves is their starter intake should be 4 to 5 pounds of calf starter per calf per day for 3 days in a row before they're weaned. Some management tips in feeding starter is begin with small amounts of starter, less than 1/4 pound per head per day. Keep it fresh, remove the old starter and feed it to older calves or dry cows, and keep fresh starter in front of the young calves. Clean, fresh water should be provided at all times, as has been said several times. Feed milk once a day, 1 week prior to weaning, and then minimize stress at the time of weaning. Transition pen feeding and management consider calves should be moved to group housing about 1 week after weaning. The first time the calves are grouped, the size should be limited to 8 calves maximum. The calves should continue to be fed starter and water and transitions gradually to the grower diet. They should be fed with a small feed bunk within the pen. When introducing hay, consult with the herd nutritionist, but appreciable amounts of hay should not be fed for 8 weeks till the calf is at least 8 weeks of age. In optimizing your calf feeding program, whichever program you choose, colostrum should be provided at least 1 gallon at birth. An adequate amount of milk replacer should be fed, especially during the first 3 weeks of life. They should be fed a palatable calf starter, and it should be kept fresh. And they should be provided free choice water through the entire feeding period. This concludes the Basics of Calf Nutrition module.
Thank you for completing this Calf Academy course. If you have follow-up questions, please contact your Milk Products National Account Manager